Deputy President Paul Mashatile, in his capacity as Chairperson of the South African National AIDS Council, will on Sunday participate at the 3rd National Men's Parliament and officiate the launch of the 2023-2025 Takuwani Riime Men's Movement Program of Action, which is scheduled to take place at Masia Village, Chabane Local Municipality in Limpopo. The 3rd National Men's Parliament will be held under the theme Men Championing Change. Now, let's discuss this. We are now joined via Teams by Dr. Matome, Kganakga, Deputy Chair, South African National AIDS Council's Men's Sector. Thank you so much, sir, for your time this afternoon. So this is the 3rd Men's Parliament after it was launched in 2021. And this year, you are now launching a program, and I hope I'm saying it correctly. It's a program of action, the Takuwani Riime Men's Movement. Perhaps give us a brief overall vision of the Men's Parliament and how this launch of the Men's Movement Program of Action will enhance some of these goals that you have.
So thank you, Unat, and the viewers of SABC. So as a broad background, when we met in 2015 to launch the Takuwani Men's Movement, we were doing that at the backdrop of, although our efforts, being materialized, we were not seeing the impact of various organizations that work with men and boys, because the data was showing that we still have high levels of burden of disease, serious crime. We know about our socioeconomic disparities. So we looked into a campaign that brings us together. So through the Takuwani Riime program of action, it's a Venn expression to say, let us stand together so that we've got a coordinated, responsive men's movement, which is institutionalized. And we looked to Parliament so that we do have that consistent, predictable platform where we meet within a scheduled basis to respond to issues that affect communities, particularly with a special focus on responding to the high rates of gender-based violence and femicide, as well as, of course, the burden of disease in our country, particularly looking at TB and HIV infections, but of course also looking into responding to issues of socioeconomic development.
So I've looked at just some of, the action plans that you have, and it's quite robust, but also very ambitious. Let's talk then about GBV. I mean, the role of men in ending GBV can never be underestimated. Just given the high levels of crime in this country, especially leveled at women and young children, boys and girls, mostly perpetrated by men, how is your forum then going to make an impact, particularly, as you say, in institutionalizing a responsive men's movement in all corners of the country?
So accountability is one of the key pillars, and is one of the pillars of the NSP of GBVF, as well as leadership. Now, we're looking to ensure that, as we launch our community men's parliaments, men are meeting in their communities on a weekly basis. We're literally pinpointing it to the day of the week of Wednesday, calling on traditional councils, calling on churches, spaces of higher learning, spaces of education broadly, as well as just, any setup that defines itself as a community, to convene men so that we engage on issues primarily around social behavioral change. Because, ultimately we need to drive the prevention agenda. A lot of our programs are designed around responding, to the after effect, which of course, while they're important, but they do very little in terms of, providing the necessary outcome that we want to see of eliminating GBV as a threat, as a public health threat within the country. Now, when we convene in these community men's parliament, we then take those reports into the broader cascaded system of now the local men's parliament. So it's quite a comprehensive framework where we literally meet through the sectoral parliaments quarterly, in local municipalities, biannually, in districts, once a year in provinces. We just held the Limpopo Men's Parliament on the 9th of August, and then once every 2 years at the National Assembly for the national, so that at every step of the way we are accounting, but we're ensuring that we leave no one behind, through public participation. So these men's parliament are indeed an institutionalized, framework that ensures that we are not leaving, the response of men to reactionary or arbitrary responses, but rather, intentional responses that speaks to community activism as well as citizens taking responsibility.
So, I mean, as we say, GBV is a crisis. It's one of the things that you are touching on. But just talking about your reach, you know, in terms of collaboration, how do you ensure that all corners of the country are, you know, are reached? And more importantly, the messaging that you are spreading out there, particularly as we talk about other things, including, like, for instance, you know, male gender-based violence, which is a silent crisis on its own. There are just so many topics to talk about, but also fundamentally, is everybody getting the same message, and particularly, you know, in your rural areas of the country?
So we've reached to every sector of society. And speaking of rural, in 2021, we launched the traditional men's parliament in partnership with the National House of Traditional and Kwesa Leaders, but together with Contralesa and working with Rolesa. And so, you know, the 20 million residents, you know, in the 30 districts where you've got rural communities, we're ensuring that all the 883 traditional councils, are championing this process of convening men, as I mentioned earlier, you know, on a scheduled basis to ensure that, you know, issues that affect men in rural communities, but broadly communities, are systematically addressed. And of course, it was not by mistake that we approached Parliament in championing this program to ensure that, you know, the issue of public participation is one that is observed. And as I've mentioned earlier, that we've ensured that, you know, we're working through that system of sectoral parliaments at all the three spheres of government, you know, from national, district to local municipalities. And the activation now of the community men's parliament now goes into the heart of the matter, that ensuring that every single community in society, as it defines itself, does create a platform for that weekly Wednesday mobilization of men, because this is a crisis that we cannot, as I mentioned earlier, just leave to chance. Now, speaking on the issue of violence in general in the country, we do know that we've said with over an average, you know, just homicide rate of 70. I mean, we're murders that occur a day, and you know, more than 8 women are killed every day in this country, including children. And so if you look at our data, we resemble countries that are at war. And this speaks to the deep psyche that, you know, we need to introspect in terms of our norms and values in society, to ensure that, you know, we begin to address those deep-rooted issues that speak to our psychosocial well-being. And when you talk about responding to gender-based violence, we need to go to the root cause of the problem in not only understanding the norms and values of society, but in mitigating on how we normalized this violence in society, you know, through problematic language, our gender stereotype attitudes, you know, issues of objectification or minimization in terms of victim blaming and so forth, because it is at that level, at those bases, that, you know, the ground is fertile for, you know, people to graduate, to begin to act out in terms of degrading, whether it's harassing, verbal abuse, which then graduates into taking away autonomy, which then leads to explicit violence. And that's often where we design programs and want to respond, but we neglect, you know, the very root cause of these problems. And it's through this institutional framework that we intend to put most of our focus on dealing with these root causes, but most importantly also addressing issues of, you know, physical disorders. You know, some of the things that we don't really, you know, take to heart, like cleanliness, you know, litter, you know, just the whole broken window, you know, just general disorder in society. You know, those, they do have an influence in terms of the environment that people grow up in, that has a great influence in kind of the decisions that that people make. So we want to ensure that, you know, not only is it a whole of society, whole of government response, but we are really dealing with the issues at the very root cause, which speaks primarily to our values and our social norms.